She wasn't born Veronica Lake, and she sure as hell wasn't born lucky. In fact, the woman who would become Hollywood's most enigmatic blonde bombshell began life as Constance Frances Marie Ockelman, an awkward, often overlooked girl in Brooklyn, New York, with a name too long and a future that seemed far too short on glamour. But behind those sharp cheekbones and sullen eyes was a storm brewing. A storm that would one day set Hollywood on fire, then burn her right out of it. Born on November 14, 1922, Connie's early life was a cocktail of instability, grief, and emotional neglect. Her father, a seaman, died in an oil tanker explosion when she was just a child, an early tragedy that left an emotional crater in her psyche and a void in her family. Her mother quickly remarried, but the new stepfather, Anthony Keene, was strict, cold, and according to some accounts, unkind. Home was no safe haven. It was a house of clipped conversations, harsh rules, and little affection. Connie learned early that if you wanted love, you had to perform for it. She was bright, no doubt about it, but troubled. A rebellious teen with a sharp tongue and an aversion to rules, she bounced from school to school, often getting expelled or transferred for disruptive behavior. One psychiatrist would later describe her as schizophrenic. Another would say she had a superiority complex. Hollywood, of course, would call her mysterious. It wasn't long before her striking beauty began catching eyes. That delicate, doll-like face, the piercing blue eyes, and an aura that could switch from aloof to seductive in a second. People couldn't help but stare. But it wasn't just her looks. Connie had an edge, a simmering defiance in the way she carried herself. It made people nervous. It also made her unforgettable. In the late 1930s, her family moved to Beverly Hills, and Connie began attending the Bliss Hayden School of Acting, more out of her mother's ambition than her own. But even there, surrounded by other starlets in training, Connie stood out. She didn't have the bubbly charm of a Doris Day or the towering elegance of a Katharine Hepburn. No, she had something darker. She was small, cold, and inscrutable. You couldn't read her, and that's what made her irresistible. A Paramount talent scout spotted her in 1939 and offered her a contract. It wasn't a Cinderella moment. She started with bit parts and forgettable roles. But Connie, now renamed Veronica Lake at the studio's suggestion, had something that celluloid loved. When she moved, she glided. When she spoke, it was like smoke curling from a cigarette. And then came the hair. It wasn't planned. During a screen test, a lock of her long, silky blonde hair fell over her right eye. The director wanted another take. The camera operator wanted a date. America wanted more. That soft, sultry peekaboo wave became an overnight obsession. Within months, girls across the country were copying it. Hollywood execs were scrambling to cast her, and Veronica Lake, the girl who grew up on the edge of rage and neglect, was suddenly the most talked about woman in the world. She wasn't just famous, she was a phenomenon. Her breakout role came in 1941's I Wanted Wings, where she played, fittingly, the kind of woman men crash planes over. The part was small, but the impact was nuclear. Audiences couldn't get enough of her, and Paramount wasted no time turning her into their next big weapon. Film after film followed. Sullivan's Travels, This Gun for Hire, The Glass Key, each one cementing her as Hollywood's ultimate femme fatale. But behind the carefully lit angles and iconic profile was a woman spiraling. Veronica Lake didn't become a star. She escaped into stardom like it was a life raft, and she held on for dear life. Because in reality, she was already starting to fall apart. The girl with the storm behind her eyes wasn't acting. The pain was real. The detachment was natural. And the fame? It wasn't fixing anything. In fact, it was about to make everything so much worse. Veronica Lake was the kind of beautiful that didn't need to smile. She didn't flirt, she didn't fawn, and she certainly didn't play nice. And Hollywood, always hungry for a new goddess, was ready to crown her, but only if she stayed exactly how they wanted. Icy, elusive, and obedient. Too bad Veronica Lake was never good at taking orders. By 1942, she was one of the most bankable stars in America. Audiences flocked to see her play the enigmatic blonde with a hidden dagger. Dangerous, delicate, and always a step ahead of the man next to her. In films like This Gun for Hire and The Glass Key, she was magnetic. Still in her early 20s, Lake had a presence that made her seem older, wiser, untouchable. But that on-screen composure masked what was quickly becoming a reputation for being difficult. On set, off set, and just about everywhere in between. It started with Alan Ladd. Lake and Ladd were paired in 4 films, their chemistry undeniable, their pairing box office gold. But behind the scenes, Ladd hated her. She was moody, withdrawn, sometimes outright cold. Ladd, who was self-conscious about his height, also bristled at the fact that Lake was tiny, barely 5'2", and he still had to stand on boxes to match her in shots. Rumors swirled that she rolled her eyes at him between takes, that she didn't bother to remember her lines, that she thought she was better than everyone in the room. And it wasn't just Ladd. Directors called her impossible, unprofessional, and uncooperative. Co-stars said she was cold as ice. The truth was murkier. Veronica was battling inner demons, severe mental health issues, a crumbling marriage, and the constant pressure to perform in a system that didn't care if she cracked under the weight. But instead of compassion, she got branded. The press loved her mystery, but studios saw her as a risk. And then came the war. Veronica's peekaboo hairstyle, her golden wave falling over one eye, had become a national craze. But it also became a national hazard. Factory girls working in war production plants were getting their hair caught in machinery trying to copy Veronica Lake. The government called Paramount. Paramount called Veronica. And suddenly she was being paraded on newsreels showing women how to pin back their hair for safety. The change seemed minor, but in a business built on image, it was catastrophic. Once the wave was gone, the box office started to waver. Studio executives began whispering, maybe the mystique is over. Maybe the magic was the hair. Veronica knew better. The wave had been a fluke, just a strand of hair that fell into place. What really drove audiences wild was something far more dangerous. Her defiance, her refusal to be tamed. But that same fire began burning bridges faster than the studio could build them. She clashed with everyone from producers to costumers. There were reports she walked off set, refused to take direction, even insulted crew members. One co-star allegedly snapped, "She's a bitch, but she's our bitch," summarizing both her power and her curse. Her first marriage, to art director John Detley, was already collapsing. She gave birth to a premature baby girl in 1943 who died just days later. Veronica was devastated, but instead of support, she was told to get back to work. Hollywood doesn't do grief. It does reshoots. Still, she kept acting. She kept performing. But the glow was fading, and the press, once obsessed with her allure, began sniffing around for scandal. Veronica gave them plenty to talk about. Her drinking, her erratic behavior, her feuds, her outbursts. It was as though the very things that had made her a star, her sharp edges, her refusal to be America's sweetheart, were now being used to write her off. And behind the scenes, Veronica Lake was unraveling. The fame wasn't enough. The studio system was squeezing her dry, and the woman once worshipped for her mystery was starting to disappear into it. Because while Hollywood loved its femme fatales on screen, it had no idea what to do with one in real life. If there was one thing that defined Veronica Lake, it was that signature hair. Her infamous peekaboo bang, the silky wave that flirted with one eye and left the other shrouded in mystery. It wasn't just a hairstyle, it was a cultural phenomenon. It was power. It was her identity. But in the cruelest twist of fate, it would also become the death knell of her career. The year was 1942, and America was knee-deep in World War II. Factories across the nation were churning out tanks, planes, and ammunition. Women were entering the workforce in unprecedented numbers, trading their aprons for coveralls and hard hats. And everywhere, they were trying to look and feel a little more like Veronica Lake. Her hairstyle was copied by millions of Rosie the Riveters from coast to coast, becoming a symbol of glamour and defiance in the midst of war's grim reality. But the peekaboo bang was not just a fashion statement, it was a safety hazard. As the government and factory supervisors soon discovered, those long waves frequently got caught in the dangerous machinery on the assembly lines. Women suffered broken fingers, scalp injuries, and near misses, all because they wanted to emulate Hollywood's blonde goddess. production slowed, accidents mounted, and the authorities had to act. Paramount executives, terrified of losing the female workforce's goodwill and worried about liability, ordered Veronica to abandon her trademark look. The demand was clear. Pin back the hair, no more hiding behind that sultry wave, no more mystery. For Veronica, it was devastating. That hair wasn't just a look, it was her. The way she framed her face, the shadows it cast, the enigma it created. Lose that, and you lose the magic. She reluctantly cut and styled her hair into a blunt bob, an unrecognizable change that felt like an erasure. Audiences who had fallen in love with the peekaboo bombshell suddenly looked at her with confusion. The box office numbers reflected it, dropping steadily as the weeks went by. But the hairstyle was only the beginning of the unraveling. Behind the scenes, Veronica's mental health was rapidly deteriorating. The pressure to be perfect, to be untouchable, was suffocating. The studio, once supportive, now viewed her as a liability. Directors hesitated to cast her. Co-stars avoided her. And worse, the press was merciless, painting her as a diva, unstable and fading. She was trapped in a nightmare where the very thing that made her a star had turned into her curse. And as she struggled to hold on to her place in Hollywood's golden era, Veronica Lake's life began to spiral in ways no script could prepare her for. Behind the glittering veneer of fame, Veronica Lake's life was anything but glamorous. The peekaboo blonde bombshell who had captivated America with a single glance was slowly being consumed by forces she couldn't control: addiction, heartbreak, and the unbearable weight of expectation. After the war ended and the factory floors fell silent, Veronica found herself adrift in a Hollywood that no longer knew what to do with her. The studio system that had built her up now cast her aside. Offers dwindled. The scripts she was given were thin shadows of the roles she had once dominated. And as the spotlight dimmed, the cracks beneath her polished exterior grew wider. Her personal life was a chaotic storm. Veronica's first marriage to art director John Tetley ended in 1943, around the same time she suffered the heartbreaking loss of her premature daughter. The tragedy shook her to her core, and rather than healing, the wounds festered. She would later say that grief became a constant companion, one she tried to drown in alcohol. By the late 1940s, alcoholism had taken hold. Veronica was known to show up on set late, intoxicated, or sometimes not at all. Directors and producers tolerated her behavior only so long. Eventually, the tolerance ran out. Studios stopped offering her leading roles, and smaller, forgettable parts became the norm. Her second marriage to actor Philip Ober was equally fraught. Though he was reportedly a stabilizing influence, the marriage couldn't withstand the pressures mounting on Veronica. Rumors of her heavy drinking, volatile mood swings, and even bizarre on-set antics spread like wildfire through Hollywood gossip columns. She was no longer the controlled, enigmatic figure who had mesmerized audiences. She was a woman battling demons in plain sight. The media's fascination with her downfall was relentless. Headlines screamed about the troubled starlet, painting her as a cautionary tale of beauty, fame, and excess. Fans who once adored her whispered about her bitchy reputation and erratic behavior. What the public never fully understood was the depth of the mental health struggles she faced: depression, anxiety, and possibly bipolar disorder, all exacerbated by relentless pressure and isolation. Behind closed doors, Veronica's life was a series of desperate attempts to reclaim control. She checked into sanatoriums, sought therapy, and tried rehabilitation programs. But Hollywood was unforgiving. There was no room for vulnerability in an industry built on illusion and perfection. Her career nosedived as the 1950s dawned. Roles dried up and she was pushed into obscurity, often working in low-budget films or television appearances that failed to capture her former glory. The industry that had once chased her faded into silence. Financial troubles compounded her woes. Without steady work, Veronica struggled to maintain the lifestyle she'd become accustomed to. She was forced to sell her homes and possessions, spiraling into near poverty. Friends and former colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to be dragged down by her chaos. The woman who had once been a symbol of cool, confident allure was now a shadow of herself, haunted, broken, and fighting a losing battle against time and tragedy. Yet, even as she fell from grace, Veronica Lake never lost her spark completely. Those who knew her spoke of moments of clarity, brief flashes of the vivacious woman beneath the torment. She was still sharp-witted, fiercely intelligent, and stubbornly proud, traits that had both helped and hindered her throughout her life. But the damage was done. The femme fatale had become a tragic figure, her story a cautionary echo of Hollywood's darkest side. Fame, it seemed, could build you up just as easily as it could tear you down, and Veronica Lake's fall was among the most heartbreaking. Her final years were marked by continued struggles with addiction and isolation, a painful contrast to the dazzling screen presence that had once defined her. And though she never returned to the heights of stardom, the legend of Veronica Lake endured, both as a symbol of old Hollywood's golden age and a stark reminder of its unforgiving nature. Veronica Lake's story did not end with the bright lights of Hollywood, but in a quiet, painful solitude that seemed worlds away from the glamorous starlet she once was. By the mid-1950s, the peak of her fame was long behind her. The once magnetic woman with the golden hair had become a ghost in the shadows of Tinseltown. Roles were scarce, offers rarer still, and the spotlight she had burned so brightly under had all but vanished. Her struggles with alcoholism and mental illness had isolated her from the friends and colleagues who might have offered help. She was adrift in a sea of fading memories and broken promises. Desperate for a fresh start, Veronica moved away from Hollywood, settling in various places across the country, including Maine and Florida, trying to escape the ghosts of her past. But no matter how far she ran, the pain and regrets followed her. The tragic loss of her child, the broken marriages, and the relentless pressure of a ruthless industry were burdens too heavy to shake. In the late 1960s, she attempted a brief comeback, appearing in small roles in local theater productions. But it was clear that the old magic was gone. The glamour had faded, replaced by a weary, fragile woman grappling with the weight of decades of pain. On July 7, 1973, at the age of 50, Veronica Lake was found dead in her home in New York City. The official cause? Acute hepatitis, complicated by alcoholism. It was a tragic and lonely end for a woman whose life had once seemed destined for the stars. Her death stunned Hollywood, but did little to alter the harsh realities of an industry that had discarded her when she was no longer profitable. Yet, in the years since, Veronica Lake's legacy has undergone a quiet resurrection. Film historians and classic movie lovers have come to recognize her not just as a pretty face or a fleeting fad, but as a complex, fiercely independent woman who challenged Hollywood's expectations. Her iconic peekaboo hairstyle remains a symbol of old Hollywood glamour and rebellion, and her performances continue to captivate new generations of cinephiles. But perhaps the most enduring part of Veronica Lake's story is the cautionary tale she embodies. The destructive cost of fame, the cruelty of the studio system, and the hidden battles behind the silver screen's glittering facade. She was more than just a tragic starlet. She was a woman who lived fiercely, loved deeply, and fought to be herself in a world determined to shape her otherwise. And though the final curtain fell too soon, Veronica Lake's story, full of brilliance, darkness, and undeniable human fragility, will never be forgotten.